In Angular, we have another directive called ngSwitchCase, which is very similar to the concept of switch case we have in a lot of programming languages. So imagine we want to build a page to display properties on a map or in a list. So here we have two tabs, map view and list view. When we select the list view, we see the list view content. And when we select the map view, we see map view content. So let me show you how to implement this with ngSwitchCase. And by the way, you can implement the exact same thing with ngIf, but ngIf works only if you have a truthy and a falsy condition. In this case, we might have multiple tabs, so we cannot implement that using ngIf, and that's why we need ngSwitchCase. So in app component.html, I want to add some basic markup to render bootstrap tabs. So here we want a UL, and this UL should have two classes. So we add .nav and also .nav-pills. This syntax you see here is what we call Zen coding, and with this we can quickly generate HTML markup. So tab, now we have a UL with these two classes. Now inside this UL we want an LI, and inside this LI we want an anchor. Now we want two of these elements, so I put them in parentheses times 2. Tab, and this is what we get. Now let me temporarily make the first LI active. So I apply the active class here and name this map view. The second LI, the anchor, should be called list view. Now below that we'll have a div, and here we'll have either the content of the map view, so map view content, or list view content. Now I want to temporarily comment this out because one content div will be rendered dynamically. Now let's just make sure that our markup is working. Back in the browser. All right, it looks good, beautiful. Now let's move on and make this dynamic. So let's go to our app component. Here we need to define a field to keep track of the currently selected tab. We can call this view mode, and we can set this initially to map, and then we can change this to list. So it can hold one of these two values, map or list. Now back in our template, let's bring this div back. We want to render one of these divs dynamically based on the value of view mode field. So on this top parent div, we're going to apply property binding. So Angular adds a new property to our DOM elements that is not part of the standard DOM. This property is called ngSwitch. We can use property binding, ngSwitch, and bind this to a field in our class, like view mode. Now, on each div, we'll apply ngSwitchCase directive. And because with this directive, we add or remove a DOM element, this is a structural directive, and we should prefix it with an asterisk. So ngSwitchCase. Now, if the value of view mode is map, so map as a string, note that I put map in single quotes. Let me zoom in. So we have double quotes, which is for the value of this directive, and we have single quotes, which is for the map as a string. Okay. Now, similarly, for the other div, I'm going to apply ngSwitchCase. We want to render this div if the value of view mode is list. Now, optionally, we can have another div. So if the value of view mode is something else, I want to render this div. So here we add ngSwitch default, and it doesn't have a value. We apply it like an attribute, okay? So let's add some label here, otherwise, right? So this is how we use the ngSwitch directive. Now, finally, we want to make this class active dynamic. So we can use class binding. We put it in square brackets, class.active, and we want to render this if view mode is set to map. So we can write a simple conditional statement here, view mode equals map, okay? And similarly for the other LI, I'm going to add another class binding, class.active, We set this if view mode equals list. Now finally, when we click these links here, we want to change the view mode. So let's remove this href attribute. We use event binding and bind the click event to an expression. Now here we can simply call a method in our class like change view mode and simply pass a string like map. But that method is going to be a one-liner. So we can simply write that expression here. So we simply set view mode to map. Okay? And I'm going to copy this and apply it to the other link as well. But this time I'm going to change this value to list. All right, now let's test the application. So back in the browser, initially, the map view is visible because we set the view mode to map in our component. If we click list, we go to the list view and back to the map view. Now back in the component, I'm going to change this value to something else. With this other div that we applied ngSwitch default directive to, this one should be rendered. So look, we get the otherwise message here. So here's the lesson. If you want to compare the value of a field or a property against multiple values, use the ngSwitchCase directive.